Hey, everybody. It is Kelly Nielsen here with Grace for Living After Loss. And on this channel, we discuss all things related to grief. What does it look like? What does it feel like? But most importantly for you, we share tips, tools, and resources on how to move through grief and get back to living a life that you love. And I am so thrilled for today's conversation because today we are going to be talking about some very unpopular but very true statements when it comes to grief recovery and learning how to move forward after you've lost someone you love. I'm thrilled and delighted to have Leanne Hall join us today. Leanne, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me, Kelly.
Yes, and Leanne is no stranger in this space. She has her own grief recovery journey and has done tremendous work in this arena, in this area. And so, Leanne, for folks who are watching this video and aren't familiar with your story, why don't we start there? Please share with us who you lost and the circumstances around their passing.
It's very interesting that I list those losses as my credentials, if you want to say, or qualifications for having a voice in this arena, which is a strange thing. A lot of people list their acronyms after their names. I list my people.
Yeah.
So the first one being my youngest son, Andy, who died by suicide when he was 16 years old, and that's been 11 years now. And then shortly after that, I lost my mom, who's my only parent, and I'm an only child. So just 3 years after that. And then just a few years ago, I lost my husband on the night of our 40th anniversary. I'd been with him since I was 15 years old. So a very, very deep soul connection. And then just 2 years ago, my son-in-law passed. And in the process of that, watching my family all go through a variety of trauma responses,
Mm.
there's been a lot of fallout from that. So those are my credentials, and that's where I start my conversation.
Yeah. I always tell people, like, we paid an incredibly high price, right, for the knowledge and skills that we now try to pass on to others. This didn't come free, right? This was the highest price a person can pay, and it's well earned. And I agree too. When I went through losses, I wanted to work with somebody who had been through the loss, because it's just very different than any book knowledge you can get. It's like someone who's been to war versus hasn't been to war, right? Unless you have wrestled this beast that I'm wrestling, I don't really want to hear what you have to say. But for those of us who have wrestled this beast, and more importantly, or most importantly, have figured out how to live in a way that we actually enjoy living after the fact, it's just vital and imperative that we reach back and help those behind us. And so I'd like to ask you to just represent your point of view about what healing looks like for you after these tremendous losses. How do you walk that out?
For me, that's been a process of it's been a growing process. I didn't just come into it the very first moment. There were some pivotal moments right after Andy passed, literally within a couple of hours, as soon as I got up off the concrete from screaming. And looking in that mirror and reconciling that this loss had actually happened to me, that it wasn't something that I was reading about in a newspaper. And I think that's so important for us to reconcile, that this is really happening to us. So you're owning that experience. And then once you own that experience, that literally gives you the power then to manage it. I didn't know all that at that moment. So my responses at the beginning, I've always told people they were a divine response, because there's no way the things that came out of my mouth came out of a normal human mother's mouth. But
Right.
I said two things that really paved my way forward. Like I said, it was just a few hours after Andy passed. Looking in the mirror, I said, I will praise you in the storm. And being a woman of faith and having that background, I knew that there's no better time to display my faith than when I'm dropped to my knees. Faith is super easy to have and talk about when all is going well in your family and your life. Who are you? What is your faith when your world has been shattered? And so that was a decision, not an emotional process. My emotional process certainly didn't feel like being faithful, but that decision was one that I made right then and there. And then I said the next thing that was very important in my journey forward is I said, I'm not the first mom to lose a kid. And what that did was it connected me to the rest of the world suffering so that I didn't feel so isolated in my own suffering. And that allowed me to pull upon other people's stories and other people's journeys and how did they survive? Because if they could, I could. So those were divinely delivered messages in those moments that continued to provide a platform for me to heal and grow. They didn't fix my emotional process, of course, but they gave me some direction. And
Yeah.
the third thing that I knew that was important is I didn't want my kid defined by how he died.
Mm,
Because there's so much more to him. And I knew in that moment that that was up to me because he wasn't here anymore. He no longer had a voice at the table.
right. Right.
It was up to me to represent him, who he is, and what he brought to our lives. That was totally dependent upon my demeanor and how I participated in my journey of healing.
Oh my gosh, there's so much good in what you just said that I want to address because I'm reading your book right now, and I remember reading you those two statements, and especially the one that well, both of them struck me for different reasons. So let's start with the God statement that you'll praise him in the storm. It's natural to question or have a crisis of faith when trauma hits our lives, right? When our lived experience seems to contradict God's word or our understanding of his goodness, right? And the faster that we can turn to him with that, I believe the faster we're going to be able to access healing. That was one of the stumbling blocks for me when my mom died, is I really wrestled with that for months. I was so angry at God. At first I thought God was just a big joke, right? I questioned my faith to my core. And then I was angry with him and didn't want anything to do with him. And it took me wrestling with that. And then finally meeting him meeting me rather, in that place that we began to move forward together. And so I love that you shared that. And that is such a gift that you had that perspective in that moment. And I hope and pray that other parents would have that supernatural gift and point of view. But I want to encourage the parents that if you're wrestling with God, if you're confused, if you're angry, I just encourage you to turn to him with those things. Don't turn away from him. Turn to him with your questions, with your confusion, with your anger, and allow him to meet you in that place. And to your point, Leanne, and in my experience as well, even when he meets you in that place, it's not a magic wand that just resolves everything, but it becomes a compass. It is a starting point. It is a place to begin, right? I love that. And then secondly, I love that you said, and it didn't occur to me, but I think it's so powerful for people to understand that you're not the first parent who's lost a child. This has been happening since the beginning of time. There have been parents, and actually, before the advancement of medicine and technology, it was far more common, for parents to lose a child, and they somehow figured out a way to continue living, and their families figured out a way to continue to exist. And so I think that's such a powerful idea to wrap your head around, that we're not the first one and we're not the only one, right? Like, because grief would have you believe that you're alone in this and that no one understands your pain and that you'll never recover. That's what grief wants to tell you. And it's our job to flood our minds with evidence of the contrary. We need to literally instruct our minds that there are others who've been through this. There are others who've recovered from this. And we are, in fact, capable to, learn how to recover and heal. So good. And lastly, I do want to talk about the legacy piece, because that's when our children pass away, we don't stop being their parent. We're still their parent. And it just shifts from giving counsel and guidance for their lived experience on earth to exactly what you said, stewarding their legacy, which is a beautiful responsibility. I have so much joy and satisfaction to be able to talk about Quentin and know that with every conversation we have, and with every video, and with every life that's touched, that is helped in some way, that's actually part of Quentin's legacy. And I get to help perpetuate that in the earth. And that's such a beautiful way to live. And I think it's what's available to every parent who loses a child, is they can step into this place of stewarding their memory and their legacy. So I absolutely love that that's what you've been doing.
I was shown the effectiveness of that, I really, when I went about doing that, I didn't know if I would be successful at it. And probably a year after Andy passed, I was at the gym, and this young girl, a teenager, Andy's age, she comes running up to me in the gym and she says, "You're Andy's mom."
Yeah.
And it kind of stunned me for a second. She didn't come up to me and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about Andy, and that's so terrible." She came up with joy in
Yeah.
the remembrance of Andy. And I thought, oh, my messaging has been effective, because she's responding directly to how I have been delivering the message of my son, that she felt safe enough. She knew that the appropriate response to me was one of joy and love,
Yeah.
rather than one of sadness. And that was early on in my journey. So I'm still floating in and out of all of these experiences, but those things just continue to reaffirm my path forward. One other thing I want to say about the God thing, it has been a gift. I know that I'm very, very thankful that that was my immediate response. And so in teaching that to others, I try to tell them, instead of asking,
Right.
ask why. Why not me? Why do we think that we're going to go through life unscathed and all the rest of the world is going to experience everything that can possibly go wrong in our lives? But we immediately go to that blaming God instead of acceptance. And I do recognize, having spoken with so many people, that my response is not really very normal, but it's something that we can work towards. And in recognizing that we're not just part of the animal kingdom where we're responding on instinct. We actually have a cognitive ability to make continual decisions on a daily basis that formulate our emotions rather than our emotions formulating our decisions. And
Yeah.
most people go through life responding to their emotions rather than their emotions responding to their decisions.
100%. Like, emotions are the last thing to change, right? And so
Yes.
our thoughts, our actions, our emotions. And so if we're being led by our emotions, the game's already over, right?
Yes.
That's so true. And I think it's not taught. And to your point, yeah, it isn't the common response that people have, but it is one, to your point again, that we can work towards and we can grow and progress in. And that is the path that you and I are both trying to help people follow, because we see so many people around us falling so short of what's available to them. And I want to speak a little bit about just your experience and my experience in this space. Even in the grief recovery space, it's mind-boggling to me that there are people and professionals who have dedicated their life and their profession to helping people who are grieving, but they're not telling the story. They're not talking about healing or recovery. There seems to be this ideology that's floating around. It's not just floating around, it's the pervasive thought in our culture, all the things, right? That grief never ends, and that grief equals love, and that you just learn to live with it or you grow around it, and all these things. So I just want to hear your 2 cents about that. And how did you, obviously, because you walked a different path, how did you find your own path against the culture that would have you believe that you're never going to recover from loss?
I think it's important that we have a variety of experiences. I read 80 books the first year after Andy died, 80.
Mhm.
And so what that did is it continued to put input into my brain that I could decipher. I could pick out well, this makes for me, this makes sense, and to begin to formulate my own journey forward. But we're so afraid, because we're in this state of trauma, that we're afraid to even validate anything that we have any knowledge of how to maneuver through this. We don't give ourselves credit. We've been taught, go to the doctor, go to the psychiatrist. It's never about what can you do on your own. And
Mm,
and also, if you look at the history of people in their success rate of persistence and patience, just look at the gym. And people start out, they'll go to the gym for a month and then they quit because they don't see immediate results. And
right.
we're a society that is a fast and furious, fix me now society. As I was going through this, I recognized that I had to change some of the mental imaging in my head. That was just the story that's replaying. And those were so terrifying to be seeing those images and the things that were continually going through my mind. So I had to come up with a process of how to replace those images. And so after 2 years, not 2 months, not 2 weeks, but 2 years of practicing this process that I'd come up with, I recognized one day, I was like, oh, wow, I'm no longer having to do this. But who has the patience to do that for 2 years? Most people don't. They give up if they don't see immediate responses. And we rely upon drugs and other things to numb our experiences rather than sitting in those experiences and and working our way out of them. It's a very cynical way that I think, I guess. I would tell you that I think, and there's obviously some really great doctors, some really great psychiatrists and therapists, but I think they've been taught in school rather than firsthand experiences that grief and trauma never end. And so they perpetuate that lie. It's not even a myth, it's a lie. It's not true. It's an actual lie that you are going to sit in grief for the rest of your life. And so if you're being told that as a newly grieving person, you're just going to sit in that and you're just going to go, all right, because you're the authority figure and you've just told me that this is the truth. It's not. And we need people like you and I to deliver this message out there to tell people it's not a truth anymore. You have the ability to heal. But it takes work.
Amen. And I think it's in line with our Western medicine idea, right? Where we don't resolve the problem, we just treat and mask the symptoms. And so, just like in physical medicine, if you're just treating the symptom but never addressing the underlying root, you're going to perpetually need to be on drugs or need to be going to a group or whatever. It's this system that creates this perpetual brokenness. They tell you you're never going to recover and you're always going to need to go to groups and you're always going to need to take whatever medicine or whatever. But what you and I have discovered is there's a process, there's a way to retrain your brain, how to respond to it. And this idea of, and so if any of you are watching this and this is new concepts to you, go check out neuroplasticity, learn about that concept, the fact that our brain literally is being programmed each and every day. The thoughts we think, the words we speak, the TV we watch, the books we read is all training and conditioning our mind to respond in a certain way. Our minds are basically a super glorified auto text corrector, system. Like it's always learning your patterns and it's looking for shortcuts. So the good and the bad news of that is whatever you're putting in is what's going to come out. The problem, if we go to your point to the thought leaders and the authorities and they give us input that says you're never going to recover, if we receive that and accept that, you might as well stop, don't pass go, don't waste your time with groups or whatever, because none of it will be fruitful. But if we will dare to believe that recovery is possible and fill our mind and start to learn and practice the skill sets for training our brain how to think about the loss and how to move forward. And I'm here to tell you that, 2 years for sure, but it's actually 63 days. It's 21 days for you to implant a new thought, and it's 63 days to move that thought to your subconscious. So the time frame between your short-term memory or conscious mind to your subconscious mind is just 63 days. So that's why when we work with folks, if you can consistently do something, the right things, for 63 days, you've given your mind enough time for it to grab hold and actually start to change your habits. And that's been the most powerful tool when it comes to grief waves and triggers and all these things. People think that we're just subject to them and we're victims to them and they're going to show up and have their way with us and we just have to try to get through them as best we can. But you actually can precondition your mind. You can train your mind ahead of time so that when those things show up, you don't have to consciously respond. Your mind and your body will subconsciously respond in a healing way, in a forward thinking way. And so like I just get excited when I find someone else who has discovered this, and that I just pray that our voices can become the prevailing voices, that more and more people would hear and see what's possible, and then have the bravery and strength and courage to adopt these things for themselves and learn how to do it, because it's completely possible.
Well, I'm listening to you say that about the 63 days, in comparison to my 2 years. It's probable that after 63 days, if I look back, that there was change happening. And so what I think is, and you may disagree with me, but at 63 days, you're probably not 100% there. The change is beginning and you're making changes. And so when I say the 2 years, it was over. It was done. It was finished with the work. I had totally revamped the images in my head so that I was no longer, the images were still there, but I wasn't sitting in front of them looking at them anymore. I tell them I was across the bridge on the pitching mound where my son was the pitcher. And so I was looking at them now from a pitching mound rather than in front of them. And I could look at them differently. They were no longer having an emotional impact on me. I can talk about them day in and day out. I generally don't, because other people struggle to listen to those details, but they no longer impact me anymore. And I want to tell people that they just don't. And it does begin with your words. I remember it about 4 months after Andy passed, and I noticed a moment driving down the highway, and it just happened to be at sunset. And in that moment, I felt good. And it was startling to me. It was disconcerting. It was difficult. And yet I knew that if I didn't validate that moment, I was missing an opportunity. And when I validated that moment, I feel good right now. And if I build upon those moments and piece them more and more closer together, I'd have this one continuous. Of course, that's unrealistic in life. We're going to have ups and downs, but they would be closer together and changing that language. But it began with me speaking that into existence, speaking that, validating those moments, and saying out loud, I'm fine. I didn't like that because I felt like I was afraid that people would misinterpret, oh, well, she no longer misses her son, or she's over it, or all those. And so I worked really hard to convey the message that I'm not going to live in that sadness, in that space where my son died, for the rest of my life. Am I going to miss him for the rest of my life? 100%. Am I going to be in a state of trauma or grief or sadness? No, absolutely. 100. And there's a difference. And so many parents are afraid, if I let go, I even verbalize or vocalize that I'm feeling okay, they're afraid that they're letting go of their child. And in fact, what they're doing is they're allowing that connection and that space, that happiness of their child, that love, to live rather than the death. Love lives rather than the death when they begin to speak life back into their lives.
Absolutely. And you touched on, I think people are worried about other people's perceptions. They're worried for some reason. Can I just say that other people are not going to understand your journey, period. You can cry for the rest of your life and they will not understand you. You can learn how to live and find peace and joy and they will not understand you. So can we just let go of the need to feel understood or validated or whatever? Those other people, one of my favorite scriptures I always talk about as it relates to grief is that one's heart knows its own bitterness and none can share in its joy. It means that the triumphs and the trials and the hard things in life, like, we alone carry those things. We experience it so personally. So stop feeling the need to justify or defend how you're doing life for anyone else. None of them are living in your heart. None of them are carrying your experience. And so I think it's so important too, what you said, when you had a good moment, that you let it happen and you received it. And this is some of the work that we do with clients, is just working through these mental obstacles around even feeling good and the hangups of feeling good, right? Does it mean I don't love my child if I am happy? Are people going to think, and to your point too, like, oh, they're over it because they're happy. Well, we know that grief is not a linear thing. And in my experience, whether you're crying or not, I found really 3 weeks after the loss, everyone else goes back to their life and you're left to deal with it. So for the love of Pete, if you have a good day, give yourself the grace and permission to have a good day. We need to learn that feeling okay, feeling joy, feeling all those things is okay for us. Not only okay for us, but it's actually one of the accelerant for healing. When you block out those happy feelings or joy or laughter, you're perpetuating the grief. You're feeding the grief. You're feeding the trauma loops, right? And so we need to find a way to let that stuff in and do its work to heal our heart and help us learn how to live again. Yeah. So
I'm
good.
sure you and I have talked about Brene Brown. Did we talk about Brene Brown?
Yeah, briefly. Yeah.
She's one of my favorite. I love watching her videos and reading her books. And one of the important things that I've learned from her is how limited our language is in general. And that because of the limited language, we're limiting and holding ourselves hostage in whatever word we continue to use over and over. And because now grief is the catchword,
Yeah.
it's so easy. People then just jump right into the grief bowl and they just simmer in there. I love an analogy one time. There's so much of my business experience that comes into play in the motivational books that I read and the things that still you realize the importance of putting that information in your head, because this is information that I received 40 years ago and it's still there because it was ingrained in me. One of the stories was the crabs in a crab pot. And that when they're just so comfortable in there, that's how they boil to death, is because it's just they're comfortable. And if a crab starts to try to crawl out, the other crabs reach up and grab it back down, because the rest of us they don't want anybody to escape that process, because then it might require that you'd put in some work. If you're seeing someone, you're going to do whatever you can to threaten to invalidate the messaging that they're saying, because that means that you're just sitting in complacent in your process. This is a work, Kelly. You and I both know. And the social media tells us everything, the information that we receive tells us that we're just supposed to sink into however we feel, because it's comfortable. It's like sitting in that warm boiling pot with the rest of the crabs. But in reality, you can be free out of that pot if you're going to put in the work. But you have to work at it. You have to surround yourself. You have to allow yourself to receive information from videos or great books or other resources that can fill you up. You've got to fill up the tank so that you can drive forward.
Yeah, you have to replace the input for sure. You have to get input that's actually going to help you to move forward. One of the things I always say is that healing isn't instant and it isn't easy, but it is possible and it is worth it. And so if I could, because in my story, I saw a woman that was healed, and that's all I saw an example of a woman that was healed, and I was like, wait a minute. And it was 9 months after my loss of my mom that I encountered this woman. It took 9 months for me to actually see someone who was walking and healing. But that was such a defining moment for me, because I was like, if she can do it, then I can do it. And if God will do it for her, he'll do it for me. And I just decided for myself in that moment that I was going to recover. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how long it was going to take, but I knew that it was possible. And that's the thing. That's why I love having this channel and having these conversations, because someone may be watching today that's like, wait a minute, if these two ladies can do it, then I can do it. And that's the biggest, most important step, is like, if you will just get a fire in your belly for your own life and for your own recovery, and just decide that no matter how long it takes, no matter, what you need to do, how many books you need to read, how long, whether it takes 2 years or 5 years. And I'm here to say, 2 years or less. If you'll really commit yourself to this work, you can get there. And 2 years is such a short period of time when we think about the rest of your life that you have to live. And you potentially have children and a spouse and all these people that want and need you to get to a place where you're actually healed from this thing. And so I just hope our conversation today stirs that up in people, that they would dare to believe, not receive what society and culture would tell them, but they would believe for their own healing and their own recovery, and they would just go after it because nobody can do it for them.
And if you are sitting in a group or a group of friends or a support group, and you are in there with people that have been in there 10, 15 years, and they're still saying the same thing that you're saying at the beginning of your journey, get out of that group as fast. Run. Don't ever look back. I went to my first, and I won't say the name, I attended a couple different groups one time, and I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to be like them 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I can't. There's no way I could survive that, staying in that space. And it is, you and I both know, well, I can only speak for myself, but I know that as I continued a very different looking journey than the majority of people, your friend base shifts. People do exit stage left because they're threatened by your healing, by your success, and that's disconcerting for them. And so you have to be fearless in that and recognize that's going to lead you, just like it did to me, to you. It's going to lead us to the people who are going to support us in this journey forward rather than in the journey stagnant.
Yeah.
Good question. Where are you? Are you in a group of people where you're stagnant, or are you in a group that is fluid and moving? And it is not always, like you said, it's not 100% forward. It's backwards. It's forwards. It's uncomfortable. It's messy, but at least it's hopeful.
Yeah.
Love that. And I didn't really define my rebellion 100% until after I became a certified grief expert. And it was going through that education process of some of the most renowned grief experts, and they were teaching this, and who was signed up, hundreds of people in these grief classes, and they were the psychologists, the therapists who were continuing to gather information to support their premise that grief is a lifelong process. And like I said earlier, it's the cynical part of me, but I would be so brave as to say that I think they do that in order to support their own businesses. You can't promote healing and know that you're going to have a thriving business, I guess, because there's no ongoing business with people who have healed. And they're going out the door. So that messaging keeps them captive in their need for the services that they provide.
Yeah. Well, again, that's the Western medicine. Let's not actually resolve the root issue. Let's not actually solve the problem. Let's just label the problem and throw a medication or a support group or whatever. I do a lot of speaking about support groups because and what we know now neurologically, it's actually very damaging to rehash and rehash your problem. So I tell people, if you go into a group, if there's not a person walking in victory, if there's not a leader who's giving you an example of what healing looks like, turn around and walk out, right? And if there's no beginning and end, if it's just like the plan is that you're just going to show up every Tuesday night for the rest of your life, if that's what they're, get up and leave. And then thirdly, if you leave feeling worse than when you came, don't go back. These are some very basic litmus tests that you need to have for yourself. And man, I love finding you and the people that come to us, and is a lonely path for us because I feel like there's our old friends who didn't experience loss who now don't understand us, right? There's the people who haven't experienced loss that don't understand us. And so there's a disconnect there. But then there's the majority of people who have experienced loss, but are the crabs hanging out now we're sad and broken forever and let's hang out over here because we're sad and broken. And it's a very few in the middle that refuse to hang out in the boiling water, but have gone through the trauma and tragedy. And so if you're watching and you're resonating with that, then you're one of us, and we invite you to come and join and connect with us and learn from us or whatever, because grief is a lonely thing to begin with, and all your relationships change, and it's especially lonely when you make the brave choice to go against the grain and contend for your own healing. And so yeah, I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for your example in the community. I'm thankful for your voice out in the earth that is letting people know what's possible for them. And I wanted to ask or give you a couple minutes to talk about the foundation that you created in your son's honor and the work that you're doing through that.
The foundation is called Andy Hull's Sunshine Foundation. We started it 4 months after Andy passed. It's changed, it's evolved, and so we have a few different programs within it. But I would tell you my most favorite, and I call it a ministry, is our You Matter wristbands. And so if you go on our website, you can actually request wristbands. They're free. The shipping's free. Everything's free. We pay for everything. We've had schools. There was a school district back in New York that requested $18,000 for all of their students.
Wow.
We shipped them. But I love the ones that I get. I got one recently from a mom who said that her son had received a You Matter wristband randomly on Daytona Beach during spring break. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. So Daytona Beach, spring break, and her son is randomly given one out on the beach. She said he's worn it for 3 years and it broke. Can she have one more? So I love the power of the simplicity of a message that resonates with everybody. And we never know who's behind that mask that we put on every day to go to work, to deal with our families, to do whatever we have to do. Who's behind that and might need that simple message? So that's one of my favorite things of the foundation. I do a lot of public speaking all over the country, military bases, construction companies, Rotary clubs, teaching about suicide prevention, but more importantly, what are some healthy coping skills and how do you heal the trauma in your life that could be a divorce? It could be the loss of a job. It doesn't have to be like what we've experienced. Trauma is relative. So it's based on our perspective of our experiences. So I love that work, and it continues, as you mentioned, the legacy that we're leaving, or continuing to create for our children. I'm always talking about Andy, and I love that.
Yeah, well, and I love that too. So we will be sure to put links to your website and information. So if you're watching this video and you want to either get connected to the foundation, or if you're looking for a passionate speaker who's full of wisdom and will infuse hope and skills, right? Because it's not enough to just know that you can do this. You have to have a process. You have to have some practical skills that you can grab onto to actually walk it out. So we will have Leanne's contact information below. And if this is helpful to you, please be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can see other videos with other helpful tools for grief recovery. So thank you so much, Leanne, for being here. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to just share your journey with us.
Oh, thanks, Kelly. Have a great day, and you matter.
Amen.